Nightmares channel.
The rain beat heavily against the windows of the Skegness police station, blending with the thick fog that covered the city on that cold winter night. The deserted streets reflected the distorted glow of the streetlights, while the residents, frightened by the recent brutal murders, locked their doors in fear of what might be lurking. Skegness, once a quiet town, had transformed into a scene of terror over the past few weeks. Bodies were found mutilated, torn apart, and always after nights of a full moon. That night, a lone driver was making his way down the road leading to the town's entrance. The rain made visibility difficult, but something on the road made him slow down, a man lying on the side of the asphalt, seemingly unconscious. With the recent murders still fresh in his mind, the driver hesitated. What if it was the killer? Or perhaps another victim? Overcome by fear, he decided not to stop and instead called the police when he reached the town center. The local police, already on high alert due to the recent events, immediately went to the location indicated by the driver. Upon arriving, under the weak light of the headlights and the dark shroud of rain and fog, the officers found the man. He was lying there, drenched by the rain, with no identification and no memory of how he had gotten there. He wasn't from the town, and his eyes, though confused, held a strange intensity. They took him to the hospital to treat his injuries, but after being medicated, he was taken to the police station for further questioning. The news that a man had been found at the town's entrance, near the spot where the last body had been discovered, spread quickly. Soon, an angry crowd of townspeople gathered outside the station, convinced that this man was the midnight killer responsible for the recent deaths. The fear and anger were palpable, and many wanted to take justice into their own hands. The man was placed in a cell with 3 other inmates. Among them, a hulking giant with a large scar on his face wasted no time confronting him. "So this is the killer?" he sneered, his voice dripping with hatred and contempt. "I knew your last victim. He was a classmate of my sister's son. I'm gonna make you wish you were never born. Tonight, you belong to me." The newcomer, however, seemed oblivious to the giant's words. He was trembling, but not out of fear. Something much darker was happening. The giant, irritated by the lack of reaction, shoved the man into the dark corner of the cell. "Are you deaf, you piece of trash?" he yelled, but his voice was cut off by a sound he hadn't expected, the grotesque crack of bones breaking and shifting beneath the man's skin. The other 2 inmates, who had been watching from a distance, exchanged uneasy glances. Something was wrong. The man on the floor was writhing, not from the assault, but from something far deeper. His muscles were pulsing as if they were growing beneath his skin. His fingers elongated, and his nails turned into sharp, black claws. His skin tore in places, revealing thick, dark fur that grew rapidly. The sound of bones shattering and realigning echoed through the cell, creating a macabre symphony of transformation. "What the hell is happening to him?" one of the inmates muttered, his voice trembling. The giant, who had been confident in his physical dominance, took a step back, feeling fear for the first time. He tried to move forward again, but hesitated when he saw the yellowish glow in the man's eyes, which were now far from anything human. They were the eyes of a beast. The transformation accelerated. The man's body expanded, his bones cracked more violently, and his jaws stretched wide, revealing long, sharp teeth. His face distorted into a bestial snout. When he finally stood up, his head nearly touched the ceiling of the cell. The air was thick with a metallic smell, a mix of blood and animal ferocity. The giant, desperate, threw a punch with all his strength. His fist landed on the creature's chest, but it was like hitting stone. The werewolf didn't even flinch. Instead, it just stared at the attacker, and in one swift motion, drove its claws into the man's arm. The giant screamed in agony, but the sound was abruptly cut off as the werewolf tore the arm off as if it were made of paper. Blood splattered across the cell, covering the walls and the other 2 inmates, who were now frozen in horror. One of them began to mutter a prayer, while the other curled up against the wall as if he wanted to disappear. The werewolf moved swiftly toward the giant, and within seconds, tore him apart, its teeth and claws shredding flesh and breaking bones with terrifying ease. Outside, the crowd continued to shout, demanding justice. The police, busy controlling the riot, didn't notice the horrific sounds coming from inside the cell. It wouldn't be long before they too realized the true horror that was now loose inside the station. With the full moon obscured by clouds and the city engulfed in darkness and rain, Skegness once again became the stage for a monstrosity that few would live to tell about. I grew up in a small village in the rural part of the municipality of Kauai, in the interior of the state of Amazonas. My story takes place in the 1970s, when I was still a teenager. I've loved eating fruit since I was a kid. Imagine tasting a mango picked right there, directly from the tree. The problem was that it wasn't just me who liked them, practically everyone in the village did. The best way to ensure I got my precious fruit was to wake up at dawn before the other villagers. And it was on one of those early mornings that everything happened. The village was still wrapped in the silence of the early morning when I left the house. The air was fresh, and the humidity from the forest seemed to cling to the wooden stilts that supported the houses. In the distance, the river lazily flowed, reflecting the few stars that still shone in the sky. The sound of the water hitting the banks, the croaking of frogs, and the occasional call of a night bird were the only things breaking the silence. The village was small, with few elevated wooden houses connected by walkways stretching over the always damp ground. The walls of the houses were simple, made of worn wooden planks, and the roofs were either thatched or old zinc. The smell of smoke still lingered in the air, a reminder of the fires that had burned the night before. I liked that smell. It was comforting. My father had gone hunting the night before, and my mother and siblings were still asleep. I took advantage of the quiet to slip out without making a sound, knowing that soon the day would start, and the other teenagers in the village would wake up. I liked being the first to go into the forest, to find the best fruit before anyone else could. With a flashlight in one hand, a bag in the other, and a machete hanging from my belt, I followed the trail I knew so well. The forest seemed to envelop me as I moved forward, and the darkness was cut only by the weak beam of my flashlight. The sound of my footsteps mixed with the buzzing of insects, but I wasn't bothered. I grew up here. I knew every corner of this part of the forest like the back of my hand. As I walked, I began looking for fruit in the nearby trees. Some branches swayed lightly with the wind, and I could see shadows moving among the leaves. Everything seemed normal until, in the middle of the darkness, a sound I had never heard before echoed through the forest. A howl, but it wasn't like any dog or animal I knew. My body froze for a second, and I looked around, trying to figure out where the sound was coming from. My heart started racing. I stood still, trying to listen more closely, but the howl repeated, this time closer. A feeling of fear I had never felt before began to creep up my spine. It didn't seem like any ordinary animal you'd find in the forest. I started walking back, faster now, nervously glancing to the sides. The flashlight shook slightly in my hand. Then I heard branches snapping, as if something large was moving through the forest, following me. The howl turned into a growl that now sounded frighteningly close. My breathing grew heavy, and the fear overtook me. I ran. I didn't think of anything but escaping. I ran as fast as my legs would carry me, dodging trees and branches, while the sound of that thing chasing me grew louder. It was behind me. I could feel it. My legs ached, sweat poured down my face, but I couldn't stop. Panic consumed me, and the sound of something heavy running through the trees came closer and closer. I glanced back quickly but saw nothing but shadows, just an impression of something big and fast. That's when, in the middle of the darkness, I almost collided with a familiar figure. My father. He was there, holding his shotgun, his eyes wide as he saw me. I didn't have time to explain. The creature was close, and the sound of breaking branches was terrifying. My father, without hesitation, raised the shotgun and fired in the direction of the sound. The shot echoed through the forest, and the noise of something heavy falling made me realize that the creature had been hit. But then I heard it fleeing, dragging itself through the trees, letting out a high-pitched whimper. A trail of blood gleamed in the faint light of my flashlight. My father was breathing heavily, staring into the woods, alert, but the thing was already gone. We stood there for a while, both trying to make sense of what had just happened. The day started to brighten, but even in the morning light, we couldn't find the creature. Just the trail of blood, disappearing among the trees. We didn't know what it was. And maybe it was better that way.